Today, I will introduce a thrilling horror movie about war from 2020, called Ghosts of War. The story takes place in France, at the end of World War II, when the country was occupied by German forces. A group of American soldiers is resting in the forest. One of them, Chris, suddenly wakes up from a nightmare. When he opens his eyes, he sees someone standing on a tree, staring at the group of soldiers. The figure keeps its eyes fixed on Chris, making him scared and reaching for his gun. Suddenly, the ghost also grabs a gun, as if preparing to shoot him. Chris asks what it wants, thinking he is about to be attacked, but when he opens his eyes again, the ghost has disappeared. The next morning, Chris and the group of soldiers prepare to leave for a nearby outpost. Kirk is suffering from severe itching due to a rash from his socks and asks Butchie if he has any spare socks. Butchie and Eugene mock him. The conversation ends with an argument between Kirk and Eugene, and Chris shouts at them, ordering the group to move. On the way to the outpost, they hear the sound of a jeep approaching and immediately crouch down, preparing for an ambush. A grenade from the soldiers' team blows up the vehicle. They then approach to finish off the remaining soldiers. Tappert takes an SS badge from the officer as a trophy, then extracts a gold tooth. Kirk kills a surviving soldier, while Butchie searches for maps and coded messages. Kirk discovers another survivor who appears healthier than the others, and upon learning that the man is a major, Butchie decides to challenge him. However, the major shows little interest and scolds the group of soldiers, calling them pigs for taking their comrades' belongings. Another soldier wakes up and Butchie immediately smashes his head. The scene causes the major to change his mind and decide to duel Butchie. The duel begins, and the major seems to have the upper hand in hand-to-hand combat. Eventually, Chris intervenes and kills the major. Chris turned back to look at his comrades, ordering them to step back, as he realized they had gone the wrong way before leaving. Before continuing, Tappert also takes a Nazi officer's coat as a trophy. As the soldiers move through the countryside, they suddenly hear noises coming from the forest ahead. The group immediately halts and waits. Moments later, a group of refugees emerges from hiding. The soldiers resume their journey, and Tappert runs out to greet them. A woman and a child stand waiting, and he hands her the coat, the gold teeth he had taken, and the SS insignia. They continued on to the outpost, passing through burned villages and desolate lands. Chris informed the group that their destination was not an ordinary outpost, but a castle they needed to protect. Upon arrival, they discovered one of the guards sleeping in a jeep outside the castle. They woke him up, and he immediately ran inside, shouting to his comrades that they could leave. The group entered the castle and witnessed the other guards hurriedly packing their things, preparing to leave as soon as possible. Before leaving, Butchie asked them to leave the radio in the castle. Chris grew suspicious of their haste to leave, as the castle appeared very beautiful. The commander explained that some of them wanted to request leave, and he would allow them to depart later. As the guards were preparing lunch in the kitchen, Chris decided to explore the castle, which Eugene had also done earlier. He found a piano and sat down to play. The melodies echoed in the empty space of the castle, amidst the chaotic corners. Chris entered the main classroom and discovered a large burn mark on the floor, where a chair had once been. Suddenly, he heard strange noises coming from the vents, but couldn't distinguish what they were. Butchie heard the strange sounds coming from the bathroom and went to check. The bathroom door was locked, and as he turned to walk away, the door suddenly opened. The group gathered in the living room, then ate and relaxed. However, they heard strange noises again, causing everyone to immediately draw their weapons and go check. Tappert and Butchie climbed the main stairs, checking all the doors on the second floor. Kirk and Chris heard noises nearby but couldn't determine what they were. They entered a room with covered objects, then continued toward the kitchen and realized the noise was coming from the adjacent room. As they were about to enter, the door suddenly opened. Both of them entered the room. When they pulled back the curtains, Kirk and Chris saw a person hanging in front of the window. But as the wind blew and made the curtains flutter, the person vanished. That night, the group of soldiers sat around the fire, telling each other ghost stories. While Tappert observed from the window through his scope, Eugene told about a diary he found in the basement. It belonged to an 18-year-old Nazi soldier who had unexpectedly taken over the castle. Suddenly, they heard a tapping sound from the fireplace. Chris suggested it might be Morse code, and Eugene decoded the message. "I have no legs." The sound stopped abruptly. Chris ordered his teammates to rest but stay alert. He instructed Tappert to go to the attic, as it was the best position to observe if anyone approached. Eugene was in the basement, trying to open a chest. After a while, he gave up and sat on the chest, noticing a photo of the family that had once lived in the castle. He read about them in the Nazi soldier's diary. Suddenly, Eugene's candle went out. He tried to light it again when a strange figure appeared behind him for a moment. When he relit the candle, the family in the photo had disappeared. Tappert placed his rifle at the attic window, observing through the scope. Suddenly, a shadow appeared behind him in the room. While looking through the scope, he saw a person hanging for a moment before disappearing. Tappert continued to observe, and suddenly, A ghostly child appeared right in front of him, startling him. At that moment, a loud noise came from the wardrobe behind him. Tappert stepped outside to check more thoroughly and noticed Chris standing and watching him from inside the castle. The next day, Eugene, Kirk and Chris sat on the balcony, talking about how the previous group of soldiers had hurriedly left. Eugene shared a story with his teammates about Tappert when they were in Paris. He had found Tappert sitting in a pool of blood, surrounded by the corpses of 17 Hitler Youth children who had been mutilated. Tappert sat there with a rope in his hand, as if playing a rope game with someone, his eyes filled with obsession. Chris said he was lucky to have Tappert by his side, and just then, Tappert appeared on the balcony. He explained that the previous group of soldiers wanted to leave because they had overheard a radio message saying that 50 German soldiers were advancing through the castle, on their way to Strasbourg. Tappert advised everyone to hide in the forest until the group of soldiers passed. However, Chris thought they should defend the castle. Tappert decided to go up to the attic to observe from above and asked Eugene to come with him. When they arrived, they began to prepare and discovered a pentagram symbol under the rug. Eugene hypothesized that the Nazi soldiers might have killed the inhabitants of the castle as part of a mystical ritual, explaining this by Hitler's obsession with occult beliefs. They didn't discuss it further and began moving the wardrobe from one side of the room to the other. When the wardrobe touched the pentagram symbol, the wardrobe door suddenly slammed into Eugene's fingers, breaking them. He thought Tappert did it on purpose and shoved him toward the wardrobe. Looking into the mirror, Eugene saw the reflection of a woman hanging by her neck. Afterward, Eugene, Chris and Kirk sat down to listen to a frequency on the radio. Suddenly, they heard a woman's voice saying that they were coming to capture them. The group agreed that the castle might be haunted, and Kirk suggested they should leave immediately, even before the German soldiers arrived. Suddenly, the Morse code tapping resumed from the fireplace. Eugene decoded the message, "If you leave?" And as he continued writing, his hand seemed to be controlled by some force, completing the sentence, "You will die tonight." The group of soldiers prepared to deal with the appearance of German troops. Tappert was in the attic, while the others hid behind a wall near the exit. When the Germans arrived, Tappert spotted them and signaled to the group. The German soldiers surrounded the castle and tried to enter, but the door was locked, forcing them to return to their trucks to prepare to leave. However, a loud banging sound came from the attic. The Germans turned back and began attacking the castle. Tappert could only eliminate one soldier at a time. Suddenly, a grenade is thrown in front of the shield wall, and Butchie jumped in, sacrificing himself to block the grenade. Chris was thrown far away, dizzy and staggering, but he still got up and continued shooting at the German soldiers. More and more German soldiers were infiltrating the castle and Chris ran to the basement, hiding under the stairs, looking for a spot to attack the officers chasing him. Meanwhile, Eugene was hiding in the office when he suddenly heard a noise behind him and strange sounds coming from the vent. He drew his gun, ready to shoot, but when he jumped out from behind the desk, he didn't encounter German soldiers, only a ghost that suddenly burst into flames. A German soldier found Butchie's torn body in the hallway, along with a second body lying nearby. He checked the second body, but Chris returned and killed him, along with 2 other soldiers who appeared afterward. Kirk, hiding in the bathroom, heard drowning noises and the sound of a child's laughter. He looked over the bathtub and saw a German soldier being drowned in it. Tappert heard a noise from the attic and went to investigate, only to discover a German soldier hanged in the middle of the room. The next morning, the group gathered around Butchie's body and discussed whether they should administer morphine to him to end his suffering if necessary. Chris ordered everyone to take the German soldiers' bodies outside. When Eugene and Kirk took them to the truck, they were horrified by the scene Tappert had made with the bodies. Later, the group talked about the paranormal phenomena in the castle. Suddenly, Eugene realized that everything they were experiencing in the house was exactly what the German soldiers had done to the family who had lived in the castle. That family had met a tragic end on the day the German soldiers attacked their home. The father was burned alive, tied to a chair in the office, the son was drowned right before the mother's eyes, and the daughter was hanged in the attic. Their bodies were never buried. Chris asked if that was the reason the family had become ghosts. Eugene went down to check on Butchie, and while he was there, he was startled by Tappert, who joined him and told the story of Paris that he had previously shared with the children in the Hitler Youth. Eugene realized that not everything could be easily explained. Tappert's story carried a different weight, something he had unearthed when recounting it. Later, Chris had a nightmare about the bathtub, in which a ghost appeared and tried to drown him. As he was pulled into the water, he saw 3 German soldiers wearing masks, then they turned into nurses, and then back to soldiers before he woke up. The next day, the group tended to Butchie and discussed leaving the castle, knowing they would be court-martialed for abandoning their guard position. Chris and Eugene went back to the basement to look for anything belonging to the family. Eugene went to search for the lighter, while Chris found a diary, but he only found blank pages. When Eugene returned, he had a suspicious attitude about this. Suddenly, Kirk called them back. Butchie woke up, repeatedly saying that nothing was real and that it was them before he died. He grabbed Chris's hand and asked him to remember that night. The rest of the team discussed leaving the castle again. Chris said they should bury the family's bodies first. When they looked at the diary again, the pages were suddenly filled with writing. Eugene said he would check the diary for clues about where the bodies were buried, but he also suggested they leave the castle first. The soldiers buried Butchie in the garden before setting off. As they were on their way back to the camp, they saw a destroyed ambulance on the road, along with the group of refugees they had encountered earlier. They continued on, talking about the possibility of being trapped in the afterlife until they came across a strange building. Later, they encountered the ambulance again and decided to turn back. When they returned, they passed through the devastated city they had gone through earlier, then rested in the forest that night. Tappert dreamt that he was hanged in the attic, but when he woke up, he was in the forest and saw the word Vetralik next to his sleeping bag. The next day, they passed the ambulance again, and when they turned back, they were faced with the German soldiers' bodies they had killed earlier. Finally, they returned to the castle, believing it wouldn't allow them to leave. That night, Chris thought he could communicate with the ghost to find out where they were buried. Tappert said the word Vetralik, and Eugene remembered reading it in the German soldier's diary. It was an ancient Muslim curse, saying that if evil was allowed to happen, it would return to haunt you 10 times worse. That night, the soldiers waited for the ghost to appear and communicate with them. Footsteps echoed, heading toward Chris. Stopping in front of him, a ghost appeared, grabbed Chris, and pulled him to another part of the grounds. Chris begged them to shoot the ghost, and although he couldn't see it, Tappert still fired in the direction of the ghost. The group followed Chris to another house, and as they entered, strange things began happening. They saw images from a different time in the past. They then found Chris next to the family's bodies. The soldiers buried the bodies and discovered the last page of the diary, which was stuck to the father's body. Eugene read the final entry, which revealed that the family was not French, but Afghan. They had risked their lives to save as many Jews as they could. The diary also stated that the mother had cast the Veterlak curse on the German soldiers, causing them to be haunted until their deaths. Later, at the castle, Eugene remembers another passage from the diary and reads it again. This time, the words had changed, now stating that burying the bodies would only give the ghost more power to return from the dead. Suddenly, the lights went out. As Tappert sat in the middle of the pentagram on the attic floor, the ghosts began to appear in the castle. Each ghost attacked a soldier, and the group tried to fight back and shoot at them, but nothing worked. Suddenly, the ghosts began to lag, and Butchie's torn-up body appeared before Chris, saying that nothing was real. Then, a ghost led Chris to a mirror, telling him to remember. Chris woke up in the present, surrounded by nurses and doctors. He looked around the room and saw his fallen comrades. Chris pulled back the blanket and saw that he had no legs, and the doctor told him that his memory would return in a few minutes. Chris began to remember that he was actually a soldier in the Afghan army, and his mission was to rescue a doctor who was helping the Americans. Their mission was to get the doctor to a safe place in Kabul. In the present, the doctor explained that they were in a facility, connected to a computer simulation designed to help soldiers recover from psychological trauma, PTSD. As their injuries were healing, Chris fell into another memory. In this memory, Tappert was talking to 2 boys playing cat's cradle and gave a toy to one of them, a toy that was originally meant for his own son. The soldiers entered the house, and the contact with the doctor told the family that they had to leave immediately. When informed that the rescue couldn't be carried out because the enemy was approaching, he told the doctor to hide them in the wall. However, the soldiers didn't want to leave the family to be massacred, even though they still followed the doctor's orders. The enemy arrived and immediately began to suspect the doctor's cooperation with the Americans. The soldiers captured the children while the mother begged them to spare them. Nevertheless, they drowned the boy and hanged the daughter, while the soldiers could only watch from their hiding place, having decided there were too many enemies to confront. Finally, they sprayed gasoline on the father and set him on fire, while the soldiers did nothing. After the enemy left, Tappert saw that the young boys had also been killed. As soon as the soldiers left the house, the mother appeared with a bomb, and although Butchie tried to charge and pin her down, the entire group was blown up. Chris returned to the present and asked the doctor why they had done that. The doctor explained that they had to create a simulation where they were in World War II, but without direct danger. But Butchie had woken up one day for no clear reason, and when he saw his own body, he died instantly. Chris thought that everything they saw and heard in the castle was their subconscious sending a message to themselves. He also told the doctor that something was wrong with the simulation and asked about Veterlik. The nurse explained that they had all said that word at some point when the soldier remembered moments after the explosion, with the mother saying the word Veterlik to him. Suddenly, the lights in the facility began to flicker, and the ghosts appeared there as well. While Chris said that they had brought them back to life and given them power, the soldiers began to convulse. Chris begged to be returned to the simulation to save his comrades. The nurse agreed and brought him back inside, but warned that his memory would be erased. Chris woke up in the forest and saw the ghost on a nearby tree, asking it what it wanted. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thank you for watching.